So this has been a very interesting story that's rolled out this week. Essentially, last week at the State of Play, Baldur's Gate 3 was revealed for PlayStation 5, and the developer Larian followed that up by saying that there is no actual console exclusivity with it. However, there is no Xbox version of the game announced for release, dare I say it, in the here and now. John, do you want to take up this story? Because it's quite involved and actually has some pretty profound implications, I think, for game development going forward.
Yeah, so I think their statement needs to be read very carefully.
Should we read the statement?
Yeah, so they actually say, we've had an Xbox version of Baldur's Gate 3 in development for quite some time, or some time. It said, we've run into some technical issues in developing the Xbox port that have stopped us feeling 100% confident in announcing it until we're certain we found the right solutions. Specifically, we've been unable to get split-screen co-op working to the same standards on both Xbox Series X and S, which is a requirement for us to ship. There's no platform exclusivity preventing us from releasing BG3 on Xbox day and date, should that be a technical possibility. If and when we do announce further platforms, we want to make sure each version lives up to our standards and expectations. So they're basically saying they are working on an Xbox version. It's not officially announced as coming out, but it sounds like it is in production. And the current reason they haven't announced it seems to boil down to, based on the statement, they can't get the split screen working on Xbox Series S.
Yeah.
Which this sort of opens an interesting can of worms, because it's something that has been feared and hasn't come to pass yet, I would say. In the past, we've seen plenty of games release with missing features on Xbox Series S, but it's usually relegated to visual modes. So, for instance, you'll be missing ray tracing, like Doom Eternal got that patch. No ray tracing on Xbox Series S, but you get it on Series X. This is the first time we've heard something specifically related to a gameplay feature that is not working well on the Series S. At least that's what I read into it based on what they're saying here. Which makes sense. Split screen is definitely demanding, right? You're rendering the same version of the world from a different perspective. It's a heavy feature. I can understand why they would be having issues here. My feeling, though, after reading this is, and I'd be curious to see what Series S owners think. I guess the developer doesn't agree with this, but I feel like in cases like this, it should be acceptable to release a version for Xbox Series X with that feature and leave that feature behind on Series S. I'd rather see the Series X be properly utilized, or at least get the game at all, than to just skip the console because, they can't get this feature running acceptably on a different machine, right?
Okay, so what I think you're suggesting here is that this is the developer's choice. And the quote from the article says specifically, we've been unable to get split screen to work to the same standard on both Xbox Series X and Xbox Series S, which is a requirement for us to ship. So yeah, they're suggesting here it's not optional. It's got to be there. It's a requirement. So I think there's two ways you could look at this, right? Either, as you say, it's a requirement defined by the developer itself that this feature has got to be in there. And if it's not in there, they're not going to ship any Xbox version at all, which kind of sounds a bit far-fetched, possibly. I don't know. Now, look, I could be wrong here, but I actually think this is something different. So I think it's actually a technical requirement laid out by the platform holder, in this case, Microsoft. Both Sony and Microsoft have a whole range of technical requirements in order for your machine, in order for your game to be compliant with their hardware. So, yeah, typically both Microsoft and Sony, when the enhanced consoles came along, there was a directive that, yes, you could have different visual features on both machines, but the gameplay features, there had to be parity between those two machines. One could not have an advantage over the other in that regard. So yeah, on Series S versus Series X, X typically has more performance modes. It has ray tracing features, which it's not mandatory to bring that stuff over to Xbox Series S. You could ship without it. But split screen co-op, I think, is something different, right? We're talking about a gameplay feature here. And I might be wrong here. but I'm pretty sure this is the case that with gameplay features, there does have to be parity between Xbox Series X and Xbox Series S. I think that's, on balance of probabilities, more likely to be the issue here.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. I initially read that as requirement for us to ship as like their own internal requirement, but I suppose it makes more sense that it's actually a Microsoft mandate, in which case I do think it's something that should be reevaluated on a case-by-case basis. Because
but that's the issue, right? Let's say that Larian get a dispensation. It's almost like a papal dispensation to actually ship Baldur's Gate 3 without this feature. Then suddenly there's going to be a whole bunch of developers who might be struggling with Series S features going to Microsoft and saying, hey, if you've let Baldur's Gate go through without split screen, can you let us ship this game without this feature or that feature?
Absolutely agreed. It's like the thin end of a wedge, isn't it? Like I mean, we've seen it before. I mean, not off the top of my head, we had, remember the really arbitrary in the 360 days. They said you could only make a downloadable game for this size. I think Castlevania had to be within 100 megabytes, and then one broke, and then several others were allowed to break over the course of the generation. So I think it's very early in this generation for them to make an exception, but they're going to have to. You're right. This is like the early sign that things are not going to pan out particularly well for Series S. And we're already seeing it like in a load of games, like how far Series S has been held back.
I think, Tom, well, I was going to say your point actually is a perfect example, because of XBLA games, when they removed that size requirement, they kind of got exponentially better. I think there's not a single person that would argue that that limitation was beneficial for the games themselves. And yes, it did leave some people behind, probably a smaller fraction, but I think it was really important for the service. And I think it's important here to allow this. I think I would say, I mean, I'd be curious to see what the audience thinks, but I would rather have the game ship on Xbox than have it not ship because of this. And I'd rather the Series X, the more powerful machine, receives extra features if available, versus holding it back just because of Series S, right?
Yeah, but thinking about those technical requirements from the 360 era, man, there were a bunch of them that were broken across the generation. I seem to recall that at launch you had to be native 720p with 2x MSA.
Not true.
Which
they broke that right away.
Exactly, yeah. The requirement was there, but it was removed pretty much from launch. Project Gotham, etc., etc., etc. Then, of course, there was the fact that all games had to be able to run without a hard drive. Towards the end of the generation, that was removed, because we had games like, I think GTA required a hard drive install.
It did, yeah.
So there's a whole bunch of exceptions across the generation, and maybe this will be one of them. I don't know. But I can see why Microsoft would want to hold their ground in the here and now for this, because, they do want to have the Series X and S as being, essentially companion systems, similar to Xbox One S and Xbox One X back in the day, where you can enhance one with visual features, but they've all fundamentally got to have the same gameplay feature set, which actually was also a technical requirement for PS4 and Pro. But in those cases, of course, it was the base system that had the critical mass. And I guess that's interesting as well, because, as far as I'm aware, the split between S and X this generation is essentially 50-50. Tom, what is your solution to this? I mean, my solution would basically be for Microsoft to send in the Advanced Technology Group to help out Larian to see whether they can resolve this issue.
I think that is ultimately the solution, but also I think the way it's been worked out before was to start with Series S as the sort of target and then scale up, much in the same way as we'd use a last gen machine.
It's not viable though, is it, in the world
not
where
in the long term.
PlayStation 5 has got a 2-to-1 advantage in terms of install base over the Xbox consoles. That's going to be the target platform realistically, isn't it?
Yeah, that would be the depressing solution to the problem.
I think that so far there's actually been quite a fine line being tread with Series S, and I think it's kind of worked. The question is this transition away from visual features to gameplay features. Is that acceptable? I think Microsoft probably think it isn't acceptable, and
Yeah.
probably for good reason.
Hmm.
But in this case, a split screen mode could be removed from the game, and I'd see that as, well, I guess it is slightly different to like a 60 FPS mode or whatever.
Yeah, I think here's the question to ask yourselves though. Would Series S owners rather have this game without split screen or not have this game at all? Right?
Right.
If ATG can't come in and help them solve it, and it just comes down to whether they get it or not, I think pretty much everyone would rather just have the game, right? Than not
Yeah.
have the game.
Yeah.
It's a shame, but yeah,
Yeah,
I
exactly.
agree. I agree.
Well, we're tying ourselves up in knots about this one,
Yeah,
which
I
just
know.
goes to show how difficult the issue
It is.
is.
It's tough.
The thing is, though, I think we have to look at what Series S is. And I think what it is actually, in a world of skyrocketing prices where the cost of gaming is shooting up all of the time, Series S is pretty much the singular outlier here to actually offer an affordable way into gaming for the current generation. And I don't think, I do think certain safeguards do need to be put in place. The question is where you draw the line. Do you draw the line at 60 FPS and 120 FPS mode support, or do you draw the line at split screen co-op? Where do you draw the line? I mean, Microsoft has drawn a line, and that's resulting in the situation that we have right here, where right now they can't announce a release date for Baldur's Gate 3 because of the Series S's, the issues they've had in getting split screen working on it. Man, this is a tricky one, right? It is just remarkable, I think, how much gaming technology you're getting with the Series S for the money. And also something which I find really, really interesting and kind of bizarre. Go onto Facebook Marketplace, shop around on Facebook Marketplace. You can get a used Series S for like £100 now.
Yeah, they're really cheap. Yeah.
That is an incredible deal. The used market for it is prices are collapsing. It's quite astonishing. But at the same time, I do think it is, in these economically challenging times, it's the machine of the moment almost. But with that said, obviously, PlayStation continues to sell spades of PlayStation 5s for, whatever it is, $500. Crazy. I'm going to have a final question here. John, where should Microsoft draw the line in terms of feature parity between X and S? That's the key issue here, right?
Yeah, that is difficult. I really think it depends on how important the feature is to the gameplay overall, right? Like
so it's a case by case basis. You're Microsoft. You're enforcing these technical requirements. You think that the developer should have the leeway to go to Microsoft and say, "Hey, look."
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, it again, because you look at a game like It Takes Two, right? That is split screen. It needs to be split screen. It doesn't work without it. Baldur's Gate 3, I'm going to go ahead and say that, at least based on the series history, I don't see how it would drastically change the experience for almost everyone that's going to play it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's a single player game primarily, unless I missed something and it's all about multiplayer now. I hope not. But yeah, I don't know. I understand why they're enforcing these things, and it does make sense to try to maintain that as much as possible. But, I think it's one of those things where they should exhaust every possibility to try to figure this out. And if they really truly can't get there, and Microsoft agrees based on their own aid that they could send to that studio, then I think an exception can be made. But it shouldn't be just like right away, early in development, saying like, oh no, we can't do this feature on Series S. Like, I guess there has to be some development effort put in, even if I guess that could also be a waste of money. I don't know. It really is difficult. I understand why it's a sore spot right now for them.
Tom, where do you draw the line? Where should Microsoft draw the line?
It is, again, like much as John said, it's down to the nature of the game. If it's a competitive game, you want a certain feature set. If it's a single player orientated game like this, I think you just focus on the campaign. You deliver the campaign as is, sans split screen if need be for Series S, and so be it. But I think I would kind of just accept it as is if they really can't do it. But then again, I've seen incredible things done. We've seen incredible games come to Switch, which is a very CPU limited system, with a certain type of concerted engineering effort. I believe a lot of things are possible. So yeah, fingers crossed for this one.
Okay. That was quite an involved discussion there, but it really does have profound implications for the generation, I think, if you actually start to remove gameplay features from one of the three consoles. I don't envy the position Microsoft is in here. I mean, on the face of it, a split screen mode could conceivably, maybe let that pass. But if you do that, I do worry that, the amount of appeals from developers about stuff that, they're having trouble with could actually have more serious long-term implications for the Series S, which is, as I said, a machine I think we need. But I guess we'll be following that one as the story develops or doesn't develop.